The siege had been ongoing for 400 years. Not continuous. History rarely offered such linear narratives. The Ashkanar Coalition had attempted to break through human defenses at intervals, separated by decades of quiet accumulation of military power. They had attacked. They had been repelled. They had withdrawn to rebuild. They had attacked again. Each assault stronger than the last. Each defense more desperate than the previous. The coalition had never been particularly interested in conquering Earth. Conquest implied settlement, integration, the necessity of managing a hostile population. What the coalition wanted was simpler: the destruction of humanity and the annexation of human-controlled space into their expanding empire. For 400 years, they had been willing to pay the price of achieving that objective. Commander Marcus Shin stood in the Earth Defense Command Center and watched the coalition fleet approach through the orbital space surrounding Earth. This was the 14th major assault in human history. Shin had personally commanded the defense against 3 previous attacks. Each time, humanity had held. Each time, the cost had been astronomical. This time, Shin did not believe they would hold. The coalition had assembled a fleet of 1,200 capital-class vessels. Behind them came transport ships carrying occupation forces. Behind those came industrial platforms designed to strip-mine human territory and extract resources. The entire machinery of permanent conquest had been assembled. And humanity, despite 400 years of preparation, possessed fewer than 300 combat-capable ships. The numbers were not a choice. The Conclave, in their infinite wisdom, had limited human military development through restrictions on weapons manufacturing and fleet size. The reasoning had been sound: if no single species possessed overwhelming military superiority, no single species could dominate the others. The reasoning had also made humanity vulnerable to a coalition of species working together. Which is exactly what the Ashkanar Coalition was. 7 species, united by economic interest and cultural antipathy toward humanity, had agreed to split the spoils of Earth's destruction. The coalition was not the strongest force in the galaxy individually, but combined, they exceeded anything the Conclave could rapidly deploy. And the Conclave, Shin knew, would not rapidly deploy anything. The Conclave protected only those species that fit within its political framework. Humanity, having caused trouble regularly over the past centuries, was considered acceptable losses. Shin activated the defense perimeter alert. All ships, assume defensive positions, he ordered. This is not a drill. Coalition fleet has entered strike range. Prepare for combat. The response from the fleet captains was immediate and professional. Humans had done this before. They knew how to die well. What they did not know was that they were not alone. 200 years ago, when the coalition had conducted their second major assault, humanity had learned a crucial lesson: backup plans were essential for species facing extinction. During that assault, a young engineer named Dr. Sarah Chen had proposed something radical. What if humanity built a second Earth? Not a copy, but an alternate center of human civilization, hidden so thoroughly that even the coalition could not find it? The proposal had been rejected initially. The cost was too high. The resources were insufficient. The technological requirements exceeded current capabilities. But Dr. Chen had persisted. And eventually, she had found funding. Not from official sources, but from private investors, philanthropists, and forward-thinking governments that recognized the existential necessity of backup plans. Over the course of 50 years, Dr. Chen had overseen the construction of what became known as Sanctuary Station. It was not a planet, despite what popular nomenclature suggested. It was a constructed megastructure, built in a region of space so distant from human-occupied territory that reaching it would require knowledge of its location. More than knowledge. It required the specific coordinates, hidden in an encryption that would take a hostile force centuries to crack. Sanctuary Station had been populated by selected humans, scientists, engineers, military personnel, cultural representatives who understood they were potentially the last of their species. They had built infrastructure, developed technology, and created a military force designed for one specific purpose: to emerge and defend Earth if the species faced extinction-level threat. For 200 years, Sanctuary Station had remained silent and hidden. Its navy had practiced in secret, developing tactics and strategies designed to surprise an enemy that believed it understood human military capabilities. Its inhabitants had waited, generation after generation, for the moment when their backup plan might be needed. That moment had arrived. The signal came to Sanctuary Station at the moment the Coalition fleet began its final approach to Earth. It was not a call for help. It was a trigger. A single phrase, encoded in the same encryption that had protected Sanctuary Station's location: the primary is failing. Discharge the backup. Admiral Helena Okafor, the commander of Sanctuary Station's military forces, received the transmission in her command center and recognized what it meant. 200 years of hiding was over. She activated the battle station's alert and spoke to her fleet. "This is Admiral Okafor. The moment we have been training for has arrived. Sanctuary Station will now engage the enemy in defense of Earth. All ships, prepare for jump sequence. Designation: Sol System. Hostile Coalition fleet will be engaged immediately upon emergence." The response from her officers was quiet and focused. There was no excitement. No celebration. Just the professional acknowledgement of soldiers who understood they were about to enter a conflict that would likely kill them. But they would die defending their species. The Sanctuary fleet was not large by galactic standards. 300 capital ships. 1,000 support vessels. Advanced technology developed in secret, untested in actual combat. But what the fleet lacked in size, it compensated for in preparation. Every captain had trained for this moment. Every weapon system had been optimized for this scenario. Every tactic had been developed specifically to surprise a coalition commander who believed he understood human military capabilities. Admiral Okafor gave the final order. Execute jump sequence. All ships, go to full combat readiness. We are going home. The Coalition fleet had just begun their bombardment of Earth's outer defensive platforms when the spatial distortion occurred. It appeared as a sudden tear in the fabric of space itself, multiple ruptures appearing simultaneously across the Coalition's formation. From those tears emerged 300 military vessels in perfect combat configuration. The Coalition's flagship commander, Admiral Vexus, did not immediately understand what he was observing. "Identify the new contacts," he ordered. His sensors officer worked frantically. "Contact signatures do not match any Coalition species. Configuration matches human military doctrine. Mass and power signatures suggest equivalent capability to our capital-class vessels. Admiral, we're detecting 300 new hostile contacts. They appear to have emerged from previously undetected space ruptures." Vexus felt something he rarely experienced in his long military career: surprise. Where did they come from? No human settlement has this many capital ships. No human development program could have produced this many vessels without detection. The sensor officer had no answer. What Vexus did not know was that he was looking at 200 years of preparation. He was looking at a military force that had been built in complete secrecy, designed specifically to operate under the tactical assumption that the Coalition would believe human naval capabilities were limited to the forces visible near Earth. He was looking at his own assumptions being weaponized against him. Admiral Okafor opened a channel to the Coalition fleet, broadcasting across all frequencies. "This is Admiral Helena Okafor of the Sanctuary Defense Fleet, representing Earth. You have come to destroy us. Instead, you have walked into a conflict you cannot win. Withdraw immediately, or be destroyed." It was arrogance, Vexus thought. Suicidal arrogance. His fleet outnumbered the new contacts by a factor of 4. His weapons were proven in combat. His forces were battle-hardened. He issued the order to engage. The battle that followed would later be called the most tactically significant conflict in human history. It was not the largest battle. It was not the longest. But it was the battle where humanity, faced with overwhelming force, demonstrated capabilities that no one in the galaxy knew they possessed. The Sanctuary fleet did not attempt to match the Coalition's superior numbers. Instead, they employed tactics that had been developed specifically for this scenario. They attacked the Coalition's supply lines first, interdicting the transport vessels carrying ammunition and fuel. They targeted the Coalition's communication network, disrupting coordination between individual ships. They focused their firepower not on destroying enemy capital ships, but on disabling them, targeting propulsion systems, weapons systems, but leaving hulls intact. Not to capture the vessels, but to create confusion in the Coalition's ranks. And then they did something unexpected. They coordinated with Commander Shin's Earth Defense Fleet. The moment the Sanctuary Fleet engaged the Coalition, Shin's battered Earth forces launched a simultaneous assault on the Coalition's flanks. The Earth ships had been damaged from the bombardment, many were barely combat capable, but they were fighting with the desperate fury of a species fighting for survival. Suddenly, the Coalition found itself in a two-front engagement against forces that were demonstrating tactical sophistication and coordination that exceeded their previous assessment. Admiral Vexus, watching his carefully laid plans disintegrate, made a strategic miscalculation. He committed his reserve forces to overwhelm the Sanctuary Fleet, believing that destroying this hidden backup would force Earth to surrender. It was the decision Admiral Okafor had anticipated. The Sanctuary Fleet withdrew in apparent retreat, drawing the Coalition's reserve forces forward into a region of space that had been carefully calculated. As the Coalition forces advanced, the Sanctuary Fleet executed a coordinated jump maneuver, appearing behind the Coalition's advancing units. The Coalition's reserve fleet suddenly found itself surrounded by enemies it could not easily reach. The destruction of those forces was not instantaneous. It was methodical. Each Coalition ship was targeted, disabled, and rendered unable to contribute to the battle. Within 2 hours, the Coalition's strategic advantage had been erased. Admiral Vexus recognized the moment when the battle had shifted. He recognized the instant when his superior force had become a liability rather than an advantage. He issued the order to retreat. All Coalition forces, disengage immediately. We are withdrawing to outer system perimeter. This engagement is concluded. The order went out, and the Coalition fleet began its withdrawal. The Sanctuary forces did not pursue. They had accomplished their objective, stopping the assault. Pursuit would only extend casualties on both sides. But as the Coalition fleet retreated, Admiral Okafor transmitted a final message to Admiral Vexus: "You were looking for humanity. You found us. We were where you expected us to be, at Earth, and we defeated you. But understand this, we are also here. We are everywhere. You attacked thinking there was one humanity to destroy. Instead, you attacked a civilization that had ensured its own survival through preparation and strategic thinking. You lost this battle. But more importantly, you now know that attacking humanity has a cost far higher than you anticipated." The news that humanity possessed a hidden backup fleet spread through the galaxy like wildfire. The Coalition, despite their military advantage and raw numbers, had been forced to retreat from a conflict they had initiated from a position of strength. The implications were staggering. Humanity was not as weak as the galaxy had assumed. Humanity had been planning for this moment for 200 years. Humanity possessed military capabilities that had been kept secret from even their allies in the Conclave. The question that suddenly occupied every military strategist in known space was simple: what else had humanity hidden? The Conclave Assembly called for an emergency session. The Coalition demanded explanations. Independent powers that had previously dismissed humanity as a secondary concern suddenly began re-evaluating their relationship with the species. Commander Shin found himself summoned to the Conclave to testify about the Sanctuary Protocol. "How long has this secret fleet been in development?" High Warden Orth asked. 200 years, Shin replied simply. "And no one in the Conclave knew?" "We told no one. We deemed it necessary to keep the existence of Sanctuary hidden to ensure that if humanity faced extinction, we would have a means of survival." Orth considered this. "You violated Conclave transparency protocols. You developed military capabilities in secret. You accumulated resources without reporting them." "Yes," Shin agreed. "We did all of those things. And I would do them again." "Why?" Orth asked. "Because the Conclave does not protect species that it finds inconvenient. Humanity has been inconvenient to the Conclave repeatedly over the past 400 years. The Conclave's protection is conditional on obedience. We recognized that we needed a backup plan for when the Conclave determined we were no longer worth protecting." Orth was silent. "You anticipated your own abandonment," he said finally. "We made contingency plans for it," Shin corrected. "And based on recent events, those contingencies were necessary." The aftermath of the Coalition's retreat created a unique political moment. The Coalition could not mount another immediate assault. They had lost too many ships. They needed time to rebuild, to reassess, to determine whether attacking humanity was still strategically viable. The Conclave, faced with the revelation that humanity had been conducting secret military development, had to decide whether to punish humanity or acknowledge that humanity's preparation had prevented a catastrophic loss. Admiral Okafor and Commander Shin found themselves in negotiation with both the Coalition and the Conclave simultaneously. With the Coalition, the negotiation was surprisingly straightforward. The Coalition had lost. They had no choice but to accept a ceasefire. Terms were negotiated quickly. The Coalition would withdraw from human space and would not initiate military action for a minimum of 50 years, allowing both sides time to rebuild and reassess. With the Conclave, the negotiation was more complex. Shin made a simple proposal: forgive humanity's violation of transparency protocols, and humanity would willingly disclose the extent of its military development. The Conclave would maintain oversight of any future military projects, but would also commit to defending member species from Coalition-level threats. High Warden North considered the proposal. "You're asking me to forgive a fundamental violation of trust in exchange for transparency," Orth said. "Yes," Shin replied. "But more importantly, I'm asking the Conclave to acknowledge that species that cannot trust the Conclave for protection will inevitably develop backup plans. The choice is whether the Conclave wants to know about those plans or continue being surprised when they emerge." Orth smiled slightly. A rare expression on his ancient face. "You've learned well from observing us," he said. "You've turned our own logic against us. The Conclave values transparency. By offering to be transparent, you've positioned yourself as reasonable. We would have to be the unreasonable party if we rejected your offer." "Yes," Shin agreed. "The Conclave accepts," Orth said. "With conditions: full disclosure of the Sanctuary Station location and capabilities. Full integration of Sanctuary forces into Conclave defense structure. And a commitment that no further hidden development will occur without Conclave authorization." "Agreed," Shin replied. "With one addition: equal representation for humanity in Conclave security decisions." Orth extended his hand. "Done." The integration of Sanctuary Station into the broader galactic community was not seamless. Sanctuary's leadership had grown accustomed to operating independently. Earth's government had to adjust to the sudden emergence of a parallel military and governmental structure that had existed in secret for 2 centuries. The Conclave had to integrate a new military force into its existing command structure. But gradually, it worked. Admiral Okafor stepped down from command of the Sanctuary forces and was offered a position as one of the Conclave's top military strategists. She accepted, with the condition that she report directly to Orth and had veto power over any military operations that she believed violated fundamental strategic principles. Commander Shin took on the role of liaison between Earth's government and the newly integrated Sanctuary forces. It was a delicate balance, maintaining both governmental authority and military effectiveness. Dr. Sarah Chen's legacy, the Sanctuary Protocol itself, became the model for how other species could develop backup plans while remaining transparent with the Conclave about their preparations. Within a decade, 4 other species had established their own backup civilizations, hidden in remote reaches of space, ready to emerge if their primary homeworlds faced extinction-level threat. The galaxy, which had believed itself to understand the scope of its own population, suddenly realized it had been significantly underestimating the complexity of its species' survival strategies. The Coalition, having withdrawn from human space and faced with the clear knowledge that direct military assault would not succeed against a species that had prepared for centuries, took a different approach. They began diplomatic negotiations. Not for conquest, but for coexistence. The Coalition offered trade agreements, cultural exchanges, and mutual defense pacts. In essence, they were attempting to transform a conflict into a relationship. Shun, authorized by Earth's government, negotiated carefully. The Coalition had attempted genocide repeatedly. Trust would not come quickly or easily. But coexistence was preferable to endless conflict. A treaty was signed. Trade routes were opened. Military confrontation was replaced with commercial competition. It was not peace, exactly. It was the absence of active warfare. But for a species that had been under siege for 400 years, the absence of warfare was a profound achievement. 3 years after the battle, High Warden North made a public announcement to the entire galactic community. The revelation of humanity's sanctuary protocol has forced the Conclave to acknowledge a fundamental truth: species cannot be expected to place absolute trust in external protection when that protection is conditional. We have learned that species that feel vulnerable will develop hidden capabilities. The question is not whether to prevent this. The question is whether to accept it, acknowledge it, and integrate those capabilities into the broader galactic defense structure. Orth paused, letting that sink in. Humanity has demonstrated that a species can develop significant military capabilities in complete secrecy for 200 years. This should alarm us. It should concern us. But it should also teach us something valuable: the Conclave's authority is based on consent, not on total control. Species comply because they believe the system is just and protective. The moment they stop believing that, they develop alternatives. He leaned forward. The Coalition's assault on Earth was not an act of aggression against a weak species. It was an act of aggression against a species that had spent 400 years preparing for exactly this moment. That preparation created a military force equivalent to any in the galaxy. That military force defeated an assault force that was larger but less coordinated. That victory was achieved not through sudden technological breakthrough, but through strategic patience and careful planning. Orth smiled. Humanity has taught the galaxy something it needed to learn: the greatest strength is not in overwhelming power, but in the willingness to wait, to prepare, and to strike with precision when the moment arrives. Admiral Okafor stood in the memorial garden dedicated to the humans who had died in the Coalition's assault. 367 names were inscribed on the walls. Ships destroyed. Crews lost. The cost of defending a homeworld against an enemy that had been preparing for 400 years. Okafor had lost close friends among those names. Had lost subordinates she had trained. Had lost comrades who had been with her in the hidden depths of Sanctuary Station. She thought about what those deaths meant. They were not tragic. They were not meaningless. They were the cost of a species' survival. She thought about the 200 years of preparation. The generations of Sanctuary citizens who had trained, planned, and prepared for a conflict that might never come. The resources diverted from other purposes, devoted to military development. All of it justified, in the end, by the simple fact that it had worked. Okafor activated her personal recorder and made a statement to be preserved in the Galactic Historical Archive: "We prepared in secret because we understood that the galaxy does not protect species that it finds inconvenient. We prepared in secret because we recognized that survival sometimes requires hiding. We prepared in secret because we refused to accept that humanity's existence was conditional on the Conclave's whim." She paused. The Coalition attacked believing they would find a single, vulnerable species. Instead, they found a species that had spent 400 years studying warfare and strategy. They found a species that had learned from every previous assault, every previous defeat, every previous moment of danger. They found a species that had decided, collectively and deliberately, that survival was worth the cost of preparation. She looked directly at the memorial. To those who died defending Earth, you died knowing that your homeworld would survive. That is not a tragic death. That is a death with meaning. The discovery of the Sanctuary Protocol had implications that extended far beyond the immediate military situation. Other species began questioning the Conclave's authority and protection. Species that had previously accepted Conclave governance as inevitable began developing their own contingency plans. The galaxy, which had been unified under Conclave authority for centuries, began fragmenting into a network of semi-independent powers, each with its own military capabilities and backup civilizations. The Conclave did not collapse. But it changed. It became less of a unified governing body and more of a negotiation framework where independent powers met to coordinate mutual defense. Humanity, through the revelation of Sanctuary Station, had inadvertently created a new model for galactic governance, one based on transparency between equals rather than hierarchical control. Whether that model would ultimately prove more stable or less stable than what had come before remained to be seen. But the galaxy, having learned that species would develop hidden capabilities rather than accept vulnerability, had to adapt to the new reality. High Warden North, in his final years, considered the full arc of human history from first contact to the present moment. Humanity had been a species that consistently surprised the galaxy. They had shown unexpected military capability. They had demonstrated remarkable political adaptability. They had revealed hidden reserves of strategic patience. But perhaps most importantly, they had shown something that Orth had not seen in other species: the willingness to sacrifice present comfort for future survival. The Coalition's 400-year siege could have been ended at any moment if humanity had surrendered, accepted subordination, and allowed themselves to be absorbed into Coalition space. Instead, they had fought. They had lost. They had retreated. And they had prepared for the next assault. For 400 years, humanity had never stopped preparing. Orth wrote in his personal record, "Species survive not through overwhelming power, but through refusal to accept extinction." Humanity understood this. For 400 years, they prepared. They sacrificed. They built a backup civilization hidden from view. When the moment came, they emerged not as a conquered species accepting rescue, but as a military power achieving victory through strategic patience. He paused, considering his words carefully. "I have lived for over 400 years. I have guided the Conclave through crises and transformations. I have believed myself wise. But humanity has taught me something profound: wisdom is not the same as control. Wisdom is understanding when control must be relinquished." Humanity did not ask the Conclave for permission to build sanctuary. They built it. They hid it. And when the moment came, they emerged not as subjects requesting aid, but as equals claiming their place in the galaxy. Orth set down his recording device. "I do not know what humanity will become. I do not know if other species will follow their example and develop their own backup civilizations. But I know this: the galaxy will never be the same after understanding that a species can hide an entire civilization for 200 years and emerge as a fully capable military power. We have learned that the Conclave's authority is conditional. And that is a lesson that will echo through history for generations to come."